Listen, what I would always relate to people in this situation, in kidnapping, missing children, whatever it may have been over the years, you're not sure if they're kidnapped or not, but humanize the person. And it could be a father, it could be a grandmother, it could be a little kid. Humanize them, call them by their name. In this case, though, they only used the name Nancy once, if I counted correctly, but it was mom, mommy, mama, different references there. That's fine. Everyone at some point has a mother, certainly in their early life, and they're hoping to somehow bond in some sort of language or communicative style that, look, this is our mother. It could be your mother. Please take care of her. And yes, we want to talk. I found it interesting that there was almost sort of a pragmatic versus an abstract delineation to the message, with Savannah being more the pragmatic one, of course, loving and saying all the right words about her mother. But the more abstract version was Annie, who I believe is a poet of some sort, and she sort of waxed poetic.
The desert air in Tucson, Arizona, carries a specific kind of stillness. It is a dry, heavy heat that doesn't just shimmer over the asphalt. It seems to swallow sound whole. But on this particular morning, the silence wasn't just atmospheric. It was suffocating. It had been 24 days since the world last heard a word from Annie Guthrie. 24 days since the vibrant, protective daughter of a prominent American family vanished into the deepening shadows of her own life. Imagine a house perfectly kept, a life meticulously shielded from the prying eyes of the paparazzi, suddenly becoming the epicenter of a national mystery. The front door remains locked. The curtains are drawn tight. Inside, the digital trail has gone stone cold. There are no frantic social media posts, no tearful televised pleas, no sightings at the local market. There is just a void where a woman used to be. But as the clock ticked past the 3-week mark, a darker question began to circulate through the hushed hallways of law enforcement and the feverish forums of the internet. Was Annie Guthrie a victim, or was she a silent architect in a much more sinister plot? Annie Guthrie was never the one who craved the spotlight. While her sister, Savannah, became a household name, a face millions woke up to every morning on national television, Annie chose the path of the observer. Those closest to her described her as the anchor, the thoughtful, fiercely protective daughter who valued the sanctity of the family circle above all else. She was the one who held the hands, the one who remembered the birthdays, and the one who kept the secrets. Her world revolved around her mother, Nancy Guthrie, and the quiet life she had built with her husband, Tommaso Shini. To the outside observer, they were the picture of stability. Tommaso was the supportive partner, the man who stood by her as they raised their children away from the glittering, chaotic world of New York journalism. But beneath the surface of this normal life, tensions were beginning to simmer like the midday heat on a Tucson sidewalk. Friends would later recall a shift, a hardening of Annie's privacy that felt less like a choice and more like a retreat. As we look back, the red flags weren't flashing neon signs, they were subtle flickers. There were missed calls that went unreturned. There was a growing isolation from the extended family. And then there was a strange, newfound reliance on Tommaso for every decision, no matter how small. The bond between a mother and daughter is often unbreakable, but in the Guthrie household, that bond was being stretched to its absolute limit. Nancy, the matriarch who guided the family with a steady hand, was about to become the center of a storm. When Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, the last confirmed sighting of her was a mundane moment, returning to her home after a routine day. But by the following morning, she had evaporated, and in the wake of her disappearance, the person the world expected to be the loudest, her devoted daughter, Annie, became the quietest. For 24 days, the silence from the Shini household was deafening. While the community organized search parties and the FBI joined local police in a desperate hunt for Nancy, Annie stayed behind closed doors. Rumors began to bleed into the vacuum of information. Some said she was paralyzed by grief. Others whispered that she was being held captive by the same forces that took her mother. But the most chilling theory of all suggested that the silence wasn't born of fear, but of complicity. Did Annie and Tommaso plan a disappearance so perfect that even the most seasoned investigators couldn't find a single footprint? The mystery wasn't just about a missing woman anymore. It was about the secrets that lie between a daughter, a husband, and a mother who may have known too much. The stage was set for a revelation that would shatter the Guthrie family's carefully constructed image forever. If you're finding this case as haunting as we are, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Threads. We're just scratching the surface of the silence surrounding Annie Guthrie. Drop a comment below. Do you think silence in a tragedy is a sign of grief or a sign of guilt? Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. The day preceding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance began with the deceptive warmth of a family ritual. Nancy had driven over to Annie's home for dinner, a routine gathering that, in hindsight, felt like a final, fragile piece of a life about to be shattered. Witnesses and family accounts describe a night of shared meals and quiet conversation, the kind of evening that defines the bond between the Guthrie women. But as the desert night deepened, the atmosphere shifted from the safety of the dinner table to the vulnerability of the road. Because it was late, and perhaps because the bonds of family dictated a certain level of care, it was Nancy who got behind the wheel of her own car. Instead, it was her son-in-law, Tommaso Shini, who offered to drive her home. This short, unremarkable journey, a few miles through the winding, cactus-lined streets of Tucson, would become the most scrutinized transit in the entire investigation. Tommaso claimed the drive was uneventful. He stated he dropped Nancy off, watched her enter the safety of her front door, and vanished back into the night. But he was the last person to see her alive, the last witness to her presence before she stepped across her threshold and into a void. By the time the sun rose, the house was empty, and the dinner they had shared just hours prior became the last supper of a tragedy. As the 24-day mark approached, the digital world began to cannibalize the Shini household. The fact that Tommaso was the last person with Nancy, coupled with Annie's absolute, haunting silence, created a vacuum that the internet filled with malice. Suspicion didn't just knock on their door, it tried to break it down. To the armchair detectives, the math seemed simple: a missing matriarch, a silent daughter, and a son-in-law who held the keys to her final movements. The narrative of a planned kidnapping or a domestic conspiracy began to trend, fueled by the cold statistics of proximity. But in true crime, we often look for a single shatter point, when in reality, the red flags are more like a slow, creeping frost. Investigators began to look closely at the shift in the family's communication patterns in the months leading up to that night. Nancy, usually a woman of constant contact with her daughters, had reportedly mentioned to close friends a sense of growing isolation. It wasn't that there was an overt conflict, but rather a thickening of the walls around Annie's life. There was also the matter of the digital withdrawal. Annie's presence on the periphery of the public eye had diminished almost entirely. The thoughtful, protective daughter had become a hermit of sorts. And some began to wonder if this was a symptom of a family protecting its peace, or a family retreating under pressure. Neighbors in the quiet Tucson suburb noted that the Shini household had become increasingly private, with the gates staying closed and the lights dimming earlier than usual. These weren't crimes, but they were anomalies, patterns of behavior that suggested a family bracing for something, even if they didn't yet know what it was. The investigation delved into financial records and phone logs, searching for a third party or a hidden stressor, a debt, a threat, or a stalker that might have been the true catalyst for the events of that Tuesday night. Yet every lead seemed to point back to the same silent house, and the same three people who sat down for dinner and rose as strangers to the world. By day 24, the investigation had reached a grueling plateau. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, working alongside federal agencies, had conducted a multi-layered search that spanned from the manicured lawns of the Guthrie estate to the jagged, unforgiving terrain of the Santa Catalina Mountains. They utilized every tool in the modern forensic arsenal: high-resolution satellite imagery, heat-sensing drones that buzzed over the desert scrub at night, and K-9 units trained to detect the faintest scent of human remains. Yet, the desert remained silent. The investigation moved beyond the physical search and into the dark web of Nancy's digital life. Analysts spent hundreds of hours dissecting cell tower pings from the night Tommaso drove her home. The data confirmed the vehicle's path, showing a direct route with no unexplained detours or prolonged stops. It was a clean trip, which only deepened the frustration for detectives. If Nancy disappeared after being dropped off, the window of opportunity for an abduction was terrifyingly small, a matter of minutes between the car pulling away and her locking the front door. Authorities also began a secondary sweep of CCTV footage from neighboring properties, looking for any vehicle that didn't belong, a roving eye that might have been watching the house for weeks. The lead investigator admitted in a private briefing that they were looking for a needle in a haystack, and that the needle might not even be made of metal. With no ransom demands, no signs of forced entry, and no forensic evidence of violence, the case was transitioning from an active rescue to a complex psychological puzzle. In a stern televised briefing, the sheriff didn't just provide a status update. He issued a moral decree. He looked directly into the cameras and ruled out the family as suspects, speaking of the unimaginable cruelty of the public's accusations. He described a family not of conspirators, but of grieving people who were barely holding on. According to the authorities, the forensic sweep of the vehicles and the homes yielded nothing but the mundane traces of a loving family. The sheriff's message was clear. Annie's silence wasn't the quiet of a criminal. It was the catatonia of a shattered soul. The law had officially built a fortress around the Shanice, leaving the world to wonder. If the monster wasn't inside the car that night, where was it hiding? The question was no longer just where Nancy was, but how someone could be taken from a high-security life without leaving a single fingerprint behind. As the trail in the Arizona dirt grew cold, the investigation entered a more cerebral and much darker phase. As the trail in the Arizona dirt grew cold, the investigation entered a more cerebral phase. Outside the official channels of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, former FBI profilers and seasoned cold case investigators began to weigh in on the mechanics of the disappearance. Their consensus pointed toward a chilling realization. This was not the work of a chaotic predator. The lack of forced entry, the absence of a struggle, and the surgical precision with which Nancy Guthrie was removed from her life suggested a sophisticated offender, someone who didn't just stumble upon the house, but someone who understood its rhythms. These experts suggested that the suspect was likely a familiar person, someone Nancy would have opened her door to without hesitation, even at a late hour. In the world of criminal profiling, low-risk victims, those with stable lives, high security, and no known enemies, are rarely taken by strangers. To snatch a woman of Nancy's status from a secure environment requires intimate knowledge. It requires knowing which camera has a blind spot, which door has a temperamental lock, and exactly what time the neighborhood settles into its deepest sleep. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of access. The investigators looked at the 24-day void and saw a perpetrator who felt comfortable in Nancy's world, someone who could move through the shadows of her life without triggering her internal alarm bells until it was far too late. Throughout this atmospheric shift, the silence of the Shaney household remained the most baffling element of the tragedy. It was a silence that felt heavy, almost physical, like a thick curtain drawn across a stage. For Annie Guthrie, the silence was no longer just a lack of words. It had become her primary state of existence. While the public clamored for a sign, a help me poster, a candlelight vigil, or a simple statement of hope, Annie remained retreated within the walls of her home. This wasn't the typical silence of a suspect hiding from the law. The sheriff had already cleared her of that. Rather, This was a profound, traumatic withdrawal that puzzled even the most empathetic observers. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, or as if the grief was so monumental that language had failed her. Yet, in the high-stakes arena of a missing persons case, silence is often misinterpreted as indifference or concealment. This quietness created a strange tension between the family and the community that wanted to support them. As the investigation moved into its second month, the vacuum created by Annie's unspoken words was filled by the theories of others. The Guthrie family had always been masters of their own narrative, but in this silence, they had lost the lead. As the desert sun continues to bleach the landscape where Nancy Guthrie was last seen, the case remains a harrowing testament to the fragility of security. The high-walled gardens and gated communities of Tucson, designed to keep the world out, have instead become the boundaries of a profound mystery. We are left with the image of a family frozen in time, a daughter retreated into a fortress of silence, and a matriarch who exists now only in the grainy resolution of old photographs and the cherished memories of those who knew her. The off-putting silence that has defined these weeks isn't just a lack of sound. It is the weight of a story with no ending, a book with its final pages torn out by an unseen hand. The human cost of this disappearance ripples far beyond the Guthrie family. It has shaken a community that believed safety was a guarantee and privacy was a shield. It forces us to look at the people closest to us and wonder how well we truly know the shadows they cast. Justice in this case remains an elusive ghost. Without a body, without a motive, and without a confession, the investigation hangs in a state of perpetual tension. It is a reminder that in the world of true crime, the most terrifying monsters aren't always the ones who scream from the headlines, but the ones who move with such intimate, quiet precision that they leave the world wondering if they were ever there at all. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant the detail, you are urged to take action. Even a fleeting memory of a vehicle, a misplaced object, or a conversation from the weeks leading up to day 24 could be the key that finally unlocks this silence. Please contact the FBI or your local law enforcement agency. Your tip could be the one that brings a mother home or finally provides a family with the answers they need to breathe again. What do you believe lies at the heart of Annie's silence? Is it the ultimate protection of a grieving soul or the heavy weight of a secret yet to be told? The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie did not end with the official clearing of her family. Instead, it morphed into a cold, clinical analysis of the space she left behind. Detectives returned to the house, not as accusers, but as historians of a life interrupted. They looked at the mail piling up, the grocery list still stuck to the refrigerator, and the bed made with a precision that suggested Nancy expected to return to it within hours. There was no Gone Girl manifesto, no hidden suitcase, and no secret bank account suggesting a woman looking to escape. Nancy Guthrie didn't leave. She was taken. Forensic behavioral experts began to map the victimology of the case, a process of stripping away the public persona to find the vulnerability. They found a woman who was a creature of habit, whose security was not just in the gates of her community, but in the predictability of her social circle. This predictability is exactly what a sophisticated offender exploits. The perfect crime in Tucson wasn't just about the absence of DNA. It was about the exploitation of trust. If the son-in-law's car was truly a clean slate, then the transition from the vehicle to the house is where the darkness lives. In the months that followed, the Day 24 mark became a haunting milestone for the community. The local news cycles began to move on, but the digital footprint of the case only grew. True crime analysts pointed to the eerie similarities between this case and other high-profile disappearances where the familiar offender theory held weight. They spoke of the grooming of a crime scene, how an intruder might have watched the house for weeks, learning when the sprinklers turned on, when the neighbor walked their dog, and exactly how long it took for the interior lights to go dark after the front door closed. The silence of Annie Guthrie, once seen as a potential shield for a secret, began to be viewed by trauma specialists as a shattering of the self. When a person's sense of safety is destroyed by an event so close to home, the brain often retreats into a protective state of mutism. For Annie, the world had become a place where a mother could vanish in the span of a driveway walk. The emotional cost was a total withdrawal from a reality that no longer made sense. As the legal system stalled due to the lack of a body, the no body, no murder hurdle that haunts so many American jurisdictions, the Guthrie case settled into a permanent state of mourning. There were no courtrooms filled with grieving relatives, no plea deals whispered in mahogany hallways, and no sentencing hearings to provide the hollow comfort of closure. There was only the desert, vast and indifferent, holding its breath alongside a family that had forgotten how to speak. The story of Nancy Guthrie remains a jagged pill for the public to swallow, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying thing about a crime isn't the violence we can see, but the absolute, crushing silence of what we cannot. The human cost of the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie eventually moved from the headlines into the quiet, hollowed-out lives of those she left behind. For the community of Tucson, the case became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told in low voices about the night the desert swallowed a grandmother. But for the family, the tragedy was not a story. It was a permanent architectural change to their reality. Savannah Guthrie, a woman whose career was built on finding the truth and sharing it with the world, found herself in the agonizing position of having no answers to give. The emotional response from the inner circle was one of profound, fractured grief. While the public looked for a villain, the family was simply looking for a trace. Tensions that had simmered before the disappearance boiled over into a weary, protective silence. The bond between the sisters, once a source of strength, was now tested by the sheer weight of what remained unsaid. Friends spoke of a family that had become a fortress, not to hide a crime, but to survive the scrutiny of a world that demanded a resolution they didn't have. In the absence of a trial or a sentencing, there was no legal aftermath to dissect. There were no victim impact statements read to a hushed courtroom, no handcuffs clicking shut, and no closure granted by a judge's gavel. Instead, there was the agonizing, long goodbye of a missing persons case. The community's reaction shifted from fervent search efforts to a somber acceptance. The yellow ribbons faded under the Arizona sun, and the missing posters became tattered edges on telephone poles, a visual representation of how time erodes even the most shocking tragedies. The legacy of the Guthrie case serves as a haunting reflection on the nature of justice and the limits of human knowledge. It questions the morality of a society that fills silence with suspicion, and it leaves a lingering, cold realization that some secrets are not kept by people, but by the earth itself. As the years pull the events of Day 24 further into the past, the void remains. It is a reminder that the most enduring mysteries are those that happen in the light of a normal Tuesday, behind the doors of a normal home, leaving us to wonder if we ever truly know the people we love, or the shadows that follow them home. As the desert sun sets over the Santa Catalina Mountains, casting long, jagged shadows across the valley, the story of Nancy Guthrie remains a haunting silhouette against the American landscape. It is a case defined not by what was found, but by the overwhelming weight of what is missing. We are left to contemplate the terrifying precision of a disappearance that left no struggle, no digital footprint, and no whisper of a trail. It serves as a chilling reminder that even within the most secure fortresses we build, our gated communities, our high-tech homes, and our tight-knit families, the perimeter is never truly impenetrable. The silence of Annie Guthrie, whether born of a soul-shattering trauma or a protective instinct we may never fully comprehend, has become the permanent soundtrack to this mystery. It forces us to look into the mirror of our own morality and ask, how much do we truly know the people we share our lives with? And when tragedy strikes, Is silence a sanctuary, or is it a cage? Justice, in the traditional sense, has remained a ghost in the Tucson heat, leaving a community to look at their neighbors with a new, lingering sense of unease. The human cost is a debt that can never be repaid. It is found in the empty chair at the dinner table and the unanswered questions that echo through the halls of the Guthrie home. As we close this chapter, we are left with a reflection that transcends the facts of the case, a realization that the most enduring monsters are not always the ones who lurk in the dark, but the ones who move with such intimate, quiet grace that they vanish before the world even knows they were there. The desert keeps its secrets well, and for now, the story of Nancy and Annie Guthrie remains buried in the shifting sands of the unknown. What do you believe is the truth behind the 24 days of silence? Was it the retreat of a broken heart, or the final piece of a calculated plan? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If this deep dive into the Guthrie mystery moved you, please like the video and share it to help keep Nancy's story alive. Don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss a new investigation. Every lead counts, and your support helps us bring these stories to light.